those of you who regularly watch my channel, you'll know that last weekend I took part in the 130km route of the Dirty Reaver, and next weekend I'm taking part in the 9th edition of the North London Dirt Ride. And that sounds lovely, right? I mean, 2 gravel events in the space of 2 weeks. Who doesn't love that? But I do have a bit of a problem, and the problem is this: a seriously cracked rear wheel rim. And unfortunately, I've got no one to blame but myself for it, because it's fair to say that the Dirty Reaver route was completely gnarly, and there were, as you'd imagine, a number of potholes on the trail. Problem is, as I tried to jump one of the potholes, what I didn't see is another one about 30 centimetres ahead of it, obscured by the shadow of a tree as I was going through a forested part. And yeah, I came down pretty hard on that second one and ended up busting the wheel. However, that said, I didn't notice it at the time. I do remember thinking that was quite heavy. I'm probably going to need to check that. But it was another good, I don't know, 10 or 20k before I got to the next food stop. And by the time I got there, I was so depleted of energy and just wanted to stuff my face full of crisps and chocolate, I completely forgot to check it. But it did get me the final 50k around the end of the route and got me back to the event village without a problem at all. The only issue that there was is that there was a slightly reduced PSI in the back wheel, so it was a little bit spongy when I got to the event village again. But amazingly, it did hold up and didn't catastrophically fall apart, and I am calling that a win for the very cheap Elite wheels. And in fact, I didn't even notice the damage until I was putting it back on the roof of the car the day after the ride in the morning as we were about to drive home. And initially I thought it was just a trick of the light with some of the dirt that was on the back wheel. In regards to the slightly reduced PSI in the back wheel, I just put that down to the fact that I might have sustained some kind of small puncture that then sealed itself because of the tubeless setup that I'm now running on these wheels, which I have to say, as a follow-up to the video a few weeks ago where I had an absolute nightmare with my first try at tubeless, this worked absolutely perfectly. So I think I'm a bit of a tubeless convert, but that's not what this video is about, as I need to try and figure out exactly what I'm going to do for the North London Dirt Ride next weekend, because clearly I can't ride on this wheel anymore. So with that in mind, I did reach out to Elite Wheels themselves to see if they offer some kind of crash replacement service. And after a few emails backwards and forwards with them, they did come back to me and say that unfortunately they don't sell this particular set of wheels, which are the ENT series, as separate wheels. They only sell them as a pair, but they were willing to send me just the rim itself without the spokes or without the hub, so that I could get a wheel built locally, which should get me back on the road. The problem with that is the price of that was $240, which is about £176, and that is about half the price that I could buy a brand new wheel set for. So to me, it didn't seem to make sense to buy just one wheel rim, which I'd then have to go through the trouble of getting built up myself, when I could just buy the pair of wheels for double the price. Now, I appreciate I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do that, because spending £350 to £400 on a brand new wheel set, and including a front wheel that I don't really need, is a luxury. But I'm going to assume that at some point I'm going to do similar damage to the front wheel, so it's always good to have a spare, especially when you ride a bike like I do and you weigh this much. But honestly though, I can't fault Elite Wheels, because although these wheels are warranted for 1,000 days, this obviously isn't a warranty issue, and honestly they didn't have to offer me anything, so I am very appreciative for the time that they took in communicating backwards and forwards with me about the issue, and the offer of selling me a wheel rim only, when, as they say, they don't sell or provide these wheels as anything usually other than a pair. So I can't fault Elite Wheels at all. So I am going to go back onto AliExpress and buy another set of these Elite Wheels ENT 2.0 wheels from them for about £350, £400. But as anyone who has shopped on AliExpress knows, they're not exactly an Amazon Prime retailer, so they are going to take a couple of weeks to come through at least, which leaves me with the problem of, what do I do about the North London Dirt Ride in 4 days' time? Well, to be honest, my options are limited, but this is what I've come up with. No, don't worry, I'm not thinking of riding the North London Dirt Ride on my road bike, because quite honestly, the first year that I rode it 2 years ago, a mountain bike would have been a better setup than even a gravel bike. So I'm not sure a road bike is really going to cut the mustard, but what I am going to do is take the rear wheel off of this bike and throw it onto this one. Now, although these wheels do look very different because these ones have a 50mm aero depth profile, whereas my gravel ones only have a 35mm, they are both the ENT series of wheels, so they do have the same spokes, the same hubs, and they are largely interchangeable. The only difference between them is that the inner rim width of the gravel wheels is 25mm, whereas the inner rim width of the road wheels is only 21mm. However, I've looked on the WTB website, which has a very handy graph to show exactly what size wheels you can fit on what size rim width, and it does show that a 21mm inner rim width can take up to a 50mm tyre. Now, I'm not going to go pushing that to the extremes. I'm not going to suddenly throw a 2-inch tyre on this thing because, quite frankly, I think that would be ridiculous. But I am going to see if I can get away with putting the 43mm tyres that I did have on this before I changed them out for these 45mm ones when I set them up as tubeless. The only other issue I can foresee is that because these are specifically gravel wheels, they may well have a slightly different carbon layup to make them just a little bit stronger to deal with some of the lumps and bumps that you would imagine you're going to get on gravel trails, whereas road bikes, yeah, they're obviously a lot more tarmac based. But so long as I take it a little bit easier on the bike this weekend than I would do on a normal gravel ride, hopefully I should be all right. Now, it does obviously mean that while these are set up tubeless at the moment, I'm not going to go ahead and set up tubeless on this wheel. So I will be running a tube on the back wheel of this bike, and I'll leave the front one as tubeless. Whether that's going to cause any issues remains to be seen. Hopefully, whatever happens, it will be less of an issue than me trying to record a video in my garden while my neighbour has their petrol strimmer out. So with all that said, I've got to get this wheel off, take the cassette off, take this wheel off, take the cassette off that, swap them over. And other than that, I don't foresee any other issues in this. But as with all of my videos, that could be famous last words. So let's get going and see what we come up against. Okay, so the wheels are off, the cassettes are off, they're both changed over, not a problem there. But what I didn't think about is the fact that my gravel bike is running 140mm disc rotors, whereas my road bike was running 160mm rotors. That's completely the wrong way around. I'm not entirely sure how it ended up like that, but that is the case. And so I had to take the 160mm rotor off the road bike and put it on this wheel. However, there is another issue I've come across, and I did say, just like all my videos, there is always something that comes up that I hadn't thought about, and that is the fact that the inner tubes that I've got for this gravel bike, because these wheels are only 35mm depth, I've bought tubes with 50mm valves on them. The problem is that these road wheels are 50mm, and so, yeah, there's not much valve sticking out, and that just won't do. So I've got two options here. The first one is that I abandon this mission until tomorrow when I can get some inner tubes delivered with slightly longer valves on them, or I can take out the rim tape that's currently on this wheel, replace it with the muck-off stuff that I got sent a little while ago, and convert these wheels to tubeless. I'm going to be honest, I've got ADHD and I don't like hanging around. I can be very impatient, so I can't be bothered waiting until tomorrow to get some new inner tubes. So I guess we're setting up tubeless. Here we go. Okay, so after the usual rigmarole of setting up a new tubeless tyre, I think we're there. And I have to say, I do actually really like the look of that 50mm depth aero profile wheel. So I might have to cancel the ones that I've just bought, which are again 35mm, and go for the 50, because I do quite like the look of that. I don't know about you. But with the old wheel now off and cleaned up a little bit, we are able to look at the crack a little bit closer. And although it does look pretty bad from the outside, I have to say that considering I hit the pothole quite hard, it has held together quite well. I mean, I wouldn't want to risk riding on it over any sort of lumpy or bumpy terrain again, but I'm pretty impressed that it held up for the final 50 kilometres, almost half of the route that I was on at the Dirty Reaver. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with this now, but I'll probably turn it into a clock on my office wall. But again, I have to say, I'm actually really impressed with how that held up. We've seen before in the Pro Peloton where, especially on rides like Paris-Roubaix or the Spring Classics with lots of cobbles, that some of the pros wheels do just catastrophically explode. And this one, despite a fairly nasty looking crack, held together pretty well for the last 50k, 30 miles of the ride. So I'm going to scratch that up as a big win for the cheap Chinese brands. But this wheel aside, getting back to this bike, everything has now been set up and seems to be running perfectly. I can't hear any air hissing out anywhere. I had a bit of a problem getting this tyre seated onto the rim. And as I was I had a bit of a nervous moment there because as I was tapping the wheel, I heard what I thought was a hiss, but turns out it was just the chain rattling. But yeah, it had a bit of an issue getting it onto the rim of the tyre, but I used the soapy water trick and that seemed to do the job once I'd wasted 2 CO2 canisters on it. And I have to say that actually, despite the fact that these are 21mm inner rim width wheels, it doesn't actually look too dissimilar from the front wheels, which, as I mentioned earlier, are 25mm inner rim width. And although yeah, there is quite a bit of ballooning because if I didn't mention it earlier, I've had to go with the 45mm tyres after all, rather than the 43mm that I was going to use from the old bike, because as we know, those ones cannot now be used tubeless because they are like a sieve. So I had to put the brand new Gravel Kings on there, which are 45mm. So yeah, there is a little bit of ballooning, so I might have to take it a little bit easy in the corners. I'll see how the first few miles go on the North London dirt ride. But otherwise, I'm pretty impressed with that. So apart from a bit of a clean-up, which I'm going to do a bit later on, the only thing left to do on this bike now is take it out for a couple of miles just to give it a test. Right, well, I've been out for a couple of miles now on the tarmac and it did perfectly well there, and I've now been on this rough and ready farm track for a little bit as well, and currently no problems, so I'm going to chalk that one up as a win. Now who knows what the North London dirt ride is going to throw at me this weekend, because quite honestly it is always an absolutely manic and mental ride, but honestly that is part of the fun of it. So I may well be looking out on scenes like this somewhere in North London and Hertfordshire and Essex where it's heading this year, or like a couple of years ago we might end up going down someone's side alleyway and through a security fence. But whatever happens, hopefully I shouldn't get any issues from this rear wheel, and I definitely think, looking at it, I'm going to cancel the 35mm ones that I've ordered and order a new pair of 50mm, because they definitely look much better. But fingers crossed, I think this has actually worked. Although in honesty, when I want to go back out on my bike, I'm going to have to take all of that apart and set it all back up with tubes again, which is going to be a bit of a pain in the backside, but it does get me out of a bind this weekend, and Cinderella will go to the North London Dirt Ball. So as ever, thank you very much for watching. Thank you again to Muck Off for all the gear that they sent me a few weeks ago. This wasn't going to be a fully sponsored video, but that's always the way it is with my videos. Things do change quite quickly. So yeah, Muck Off to the rescue again, which is quite nice. But I hope you found this one entertaining and you had a good laugh at some of my misfortune. But otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Ride safe.